Resting center is a playful parameter or rule that allows you to really consider what happens if you cannot put your subject in the center. So in this rule, we turn on the rule of thirds grid on the camera and we take a look at that center area, and whatever we're become interested in pointing the camera at, we ask ourselves what happens if we don't put that subject in the center. So in this case, and this is a student photograph, let's say the student picks up the camera and points it at the hand, and the hand is in the center square. Then with this rule, you shift from up or down or side to side, and you push what became the initial point of focus of your photo off to the side. And when you do that, you're going to get a certain amount of imbalance. So then the question becomes, well, what do you counterbalance that with? So if you've shifted the hand off to the side, then you look around, or you physically move your body around. In this case, the photographer moved their body down onto the ground below the grass in order to get the grass as a foreground element, and to have that come in from the edges. So in a certain way, this is a continuation of the idea of attention to edges. By not being able to place something in the center, we have to find one or more or multiple ways to push our subject matter around the edges and keep the eye from falling off the side, and instead have multiple ways to engage us with the areas outside of that central area. Sometimes this will have a more singular focus, something that you'll notice there's some crossover. This is also a very strong rule of thirds. The central area, and then it's having a large portion of negative space or breathing space, where there's essentially no or very little detail. So the entire area becomes in a state of rest with a high intensity contrast and area of detail and attention and focus over on one side, but the sort of 2/3 to 1/3 creates a pleasing balance that doesn't feel lopsided. Sometimes when we shift things off center, so if we first pick up the camera and point it at the bowl, and then we shift off center, sometimes we'll find some interesting elements that sort of change and make what becomes our focus more interesting than our initial impulse, which might have been to pick it up, place something in the center. This also creates a dialogue between the fresh apples in the bowl and the bits of residue now on the counter. And so there begins to be a little more of a story or an essay being told here by having to work the information around that central point. And this continues to create sometimes some interesting shapes around the edges as well, in the form of triangles or trapezoids. And here the central area is a little more of a breathing space. It's not an absolute, there can be absolutely nothing, but there should be primarily nothing, and your eye should be primarily moving around the edges. Again here, sometimes we think of subjects as physical objects, and so we'll tend to turn the camera towards the actual building, the lamp, or the tree. So now you can literally think of the negative space, something that is not physical object, as the thing you're going to put in the center, and then ask yourself, what can then happen around the edges? This one is similar to the student photograph we looked at earlier with the face, where the bulk of the interest is congregated in a particular area. But this large black space, which I'm imagining is some kind of doorway or piece of furniture, this is a wonderful breathing area, and this allows us then to this treat of this concentration of this area here to really be able to focus on the small area here. So one thing that can be very helpful to get more breathing space is using foreground elements. In this case, getting very close to something in the foreground and just allowing it to go empty and breathe. If you have a horizon line, then push the horizon line down towards one of the lower thirds or up towards one of the upper thirds, and then push your points of interest off onto the other third lines. That will allow your center to breathe. That will help you bring in elements of rule of thirds, and that will help you get an asymmetrical but balanced composition. So sometimes there's subject matter that really pulls at our attention strings, and it's our first impulse. On your contact sheets, you will often put this subject in the center. In this case, let's take a look at the cat. Then you tell yourself, okay, what are my rules? I have to look at my grid. I have to push it off and down. And if I do that, now the thing that initially called your attention, you might have a great deal of empty space. So depending on how I was zoomed in on this, if I had started out with my subject in the center, and then I said, okay, I have to push it down, this might feel imbalanced. And so then I might have to either zoom out or back up and start to look at, okay, what are some elements that I could find on the sides to balance this? Then I may need to zoom out or back up more to find more elements. And I keep shooting as I'm doing that until I find enough balance and interest to feel like I've resolved the composition. This is a really nice example of something that combines both resting center and attention to edges. You've got some really interesting lines pushing in from the edges. And sometimes I like to look at these lines as they're things that are leading me in a particular direction. And then you've got some other lines that are either pushing us this way, or some ways it's pushing me this way towards where this gets darker. So I've got tension going this way, tension going this way, and then tension going back and forth. I might also think of this as tension going this way and coming down. And then if things are heading down, it's helpful to have something that's kind of pushing in the opposite direction. So that overall, we're asking ourselves, how does our eye tend to move around the page? And the more that the eye moves around and sort of bounces off the edges, and then maybe comes back up and looks at some details, you want so that you're getting a nice variety. You'll notice that this falls on like the third line. So again, if you have a horizon line and the horizon line tends to be in the center, either push it up or push it down. One artist, not a photographer, Degas, really made use of resting centers. So he tended to push his horizon line, which is your eye level. So by getting up high and looking down, the eye level, which is also the eye level of the figures here, That eye level comes at either very high points and very low points, and also around the edge. So we look at their eye level. That moves us around, and then we have this nice resting spot down below in the center. Then back to looking at some photographers, and once again how this creates dialogue between subject, action, and information that counterbalances. Subject, counter subject, breathing space. Okay.